Hello, welcome to the final PJ and Dunkley. I'm actually moving on to pastures new after this video, so thanks everyone for watching. Delighted once again and for the last time to be joined by the four-time Snaps champion Paul Jacobs. How's it going?
Good, thank you.
We're going to be doing a Cheltenham recap. The racing this weekend isn't that great, although I know Paul has a best bet from Newbury, which he'll be focusing on at the end of the video. But we're going to be looking back on 5 horses who we both agree are really ones to watch for next year's festival. Already getting that into gear. I already can't wait for next year's festival, to be honest. It was so good that I just can't wait again. We're going to kick off with the incredible performance in the JLT, Paul, and that was Vital.
Yeah, it was a marvellous performance, and the way he glided over his fences. And I think the biggest thing about this horse is his high cruising speed. He almost gets his rivals in trouble. And the two in behind him, Valsalido and Apache Stronghold, who came home strongly, seemed to be travelling well within themselves at the top of the hill, but they just couldn't summon up the finish to get anywhere near him. And Vitor at the home straight down the final two fences was simply poetry in motion. He strikes me as a horse with more speed than possibly stamina. And when people are putting him up at 5-1 for the Gold Cup, and yet he's 4-1 for the King George, it's quite obvious which is going to be the best target for him if you're a punter. And we've said it on site, and Dunkers and I have said it many times before, that the Gold Cup is a totally different race to the King George, and many horses that have won the King George 2 or 3 times simply haven't got home over Cheltenham over the extra 2.5 miles on a stiffer track in the Gold Cup. And this is the way I see it with Vitor. I'm not saying he couldn't do it on good ground at Cheltenham, but if there's any bit of a dig, and they, for example, have the run of the races it was this year, and we get a Coney Green in there, and it could be Coney Green next year, that sets the pace again. I think even on good to soft ground, he's going to struggle to get home up the hill. But I think the King George is made for him. I know it's a race you regularly attend at Kempton Park, and I think 4-1 is just an outstanding price. I think Ladbrokes goes as low as 5-2, which is probably about right. But 4-1 is stealing a little bit of money. If you remain sound between now and Boxing Day, I think it's a hell of a bet.
How much closer do you reckon Apache Stronghold and Valsalido would have got to him had it been proper good to soft ground?
I think they would have got a wee bit closer, but the thing with Valsalido, he's almost a victim of his own stable's riches. He should really have run in the RSA chase.
Yeah.
And it was almost like, well, he was a second string in every single race he was entered in. I think he's got a really good chance of staying the Gold Cup trip, and I wouldn't write him off. I thought he jumped beautifully. And Apache Stronghold is the least fluent of the 3 over fences. I mean, he's a big, scopy individual, and Noel Mead has always said, I'll wait another year really before we see the best of him. But it wasn't a bad run, was it?
No, it was a good run,
really good, you know. And he's a lovely big horse, and he'll certainly, I think, stay further. But I think he needs time, and we say this about, and it's a bit of a cliche, but it's so true about horses. He's a big, gross horse. He needs to basically strengthen up and carry this huge frame he's got, and he's a massive horse compared to the other two.
Indeed. Well, one horse who we're pretty sure will be going for next year's Gold Cup is Don Poli, the RSA winner. Paul, the thing that really impressed me about this performance was that if you look at the first half of the race, he barely jumps a fence. I mean, he's hitting them, he's getting in very close, and then 4 out, it all just changes.
Yeah, he's got huge room for improvement in his jumping. He almost fiddled half of his obstacles, and he was being nibbled along. The great thing about this horse, though, he responds, doesn't he? And I think
which makes me think a Gold Cup test is exactly what he needs. He strikes him a bit like a synchronised.
Absolutely, but I think he's a better horse than a synchronised. And I think you'll be sure that Willie Mullins is going to work extensively on his jumping in the summer. And he's a horse I think can only get stronger and more fluent as ultimate. But the great thing about him, apart from his jumping, if you cast that to one side, is he has an absolute Rolls Royce of an engine. And once he's really asked to dig deeper, it was marvellous the way he pulled clear between the last 2 and over the last, and head bowed in honesty. And the way he galloped up the hill, he looks an out-and-out stayer, and the extra 2.5 furlongs on slower ground, hopefully on Gold Cup day, would suit him. I made him one of my main choices of the Gold Cup, and I actually backed him at 20-1 with the bookmaker before the RSA chase. I couldn't get much on, which is typical about layers nowadays, and he's as low as 5-1. You can get him as big as 6s. I would prefer him for the Gold Cup over Vitor. And similarly, if you went for the King George, I'd be scared at a really important point that he would be outpaced and run a flat spot in his race. So I think he's more of a Gold Cup horse than a King George horse, but plenty of the races he can take in between, the Lexus, the Irish Hennessy, etc. He's a really exciting recruit amongst a host, a generation of novices we haven't seen the like of for many a year.
Indeed. And to put a line under the Gold Cup after this, we're going to talk about the actual Gold Cup and Hollywell, who ran a cracker.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about 4 or 5 other horses in the book for next year's Gold Cup, but on ground he quite obviously was hating, and he wasn't given a hard time by Richard McClellan. I thought it was a really clever ride from Richie. He thought he'd hunt him around and ask him from the bottom of the hill. So unlike the horses that finished in front of him, the 3 that finished in front, he didn't have such a testing race. And we know in the past, because we've talked about this off camera between the two of us, and you will have talked about it with every fellow punters out there, that a hard race in the Gold Cup can kill a horse, in inverted commas. It's done that to Bobsworth for sure.
Yeah.
We didn't realise at the time, but it absolutely bottomed out, and it makes you, when you hark back to a horse like Best Mate winning it 3 times on the trot, just shows you what maybe we've sort of underrated him, even though the bare form wasn't brilliant. Maybe we've underrated him being such a hardy horse, and how clever was Mrs. Knight to actually campaign him the way she did. You know, she's a lot of
very sparingly, yeah.
And she was so patient. This horse is a spring horse. He loves Cheltenham, obviously, and on good ground would he have been in the first 3? Absolutely. And he's only fairly lightly raced as well. And I think John Joe will probably campaign him really conservatively next season. And at 25-1. He's my each way bet behind Don Poley for next year's Gold Cup at this moment in time.
Well, I think he doesn't look like the same horse anywhere other than Cheltenham, does he? Cheltenham won
absolutely.
2 festivals on the trot before and a 4th in the Gold Cup. I mean, you can't really argue.
And pre the end of January as well. I mean, he jumped like an absolute cow, didn't he, in his previous 2 races before he went to Kelso. So good ground is the key to him, spring and Cheltenham. It just sets some horses alike.
The cameras were turned off for this one, but Au Petit Soin was extremely impressive in the Coral Cup and a really breathtaking UK debut.
Yeah, and I think the message was in the fact that Paul Nicholls was prepared to run such an inexperienced horse, first time out in Britain, in such a ultra competitive race.
Oh, but he's done that before, hasn't he?
He has done it before.
Last year's festival.
He has done it before, but you've not seen a horse win like this. I mean, I think it was an awesome victory. And I had a look in the RSA list for next year's festival. He's not even in there. Now, it's 33-1. I'll guarantee with the greatest respect to our partners, I'll ring up all the partners and say, can I have a price like Au Petit Soin? They'll probably go, 20-1, but he's not in your list. I will play him in the RSA chase. That's where he's going to go. His stable consider him as, hopefully for them, a potential Gold Cup horse. It's what owner John Hales has wanted for years and years and years. Best horse he ever had, of course, was One Man. But he wants a Gold Cup winner. He's been a tremendous supporter of racing. He's got a really nice horse. He's got bags of scope. We know he's going to stay. Absolutely. Cast iron going to stay. He jumped fairly well for such an inexperienced horse in the Coral Cup, and I really like him. And I will be trying to get a big price for the RSA chase next year, but don't sort of count your chickens.
You need your daughter to ring up.
I do.
Instead,
I need someone who sounds an absolute mud to ring up, and I'll put a voice on it.
It's fun, mate. I'll do it.
We'll get the answers.
And the final horse is, of course, Pinot de Rey, the last year's Grand National winner. I thought quite a respectable run in the Potemps.
I think it really was. He was never put in the race because he can never get in the race because we know he's paceless.
Yeah.
He's off a lower mark this time around in the Potemps. He's off a slightly higher mark in the Grand National, but you'd expect that as a 12-year-old. He's been campaigned over hurdles previously. He was never near at Exeter, and he turned that form around with a couple of horses in one of these Potemps qualifiers. I'm not saying he's going to win the Grand National, right? But you can get 40-1, I think 50-1 on the exchanges on him. I think he's got every chance of being placed with a clear round because it's quite clear he's got few miles on the clock for a 12-year-old. I think he's won 15 times over fence, which is not a lot. I think he's won 4 times. But if he puts in a clear round, and many people thought that was his Achilles heel last year in the Grand National, he wouldn't jump round. He's going to stay on so much stronger than those higher than him in the handicap and those higher in the betting. And if you look down through the field and you really dissect the field, Dunkers, there's quite a few horses in the top half of the betting that are nowhere near guaranteed to stay, even on good ground. And we know nowadays that the entry executive won't let it become good fast ground. It'll be good with a bit of cut in it, at best. And that suits him nicely. And if he gets into a rhythm, and if he's anywhere near them off the Melling Road, I think he could stay on into a place. And I think he is the one horse at the moment, and I haven't had much of a play in the Grand National, that could outrun his big odds.
Very interesting, Paul, as always. Well, that's it. That's PJ and Dunkley done and dusted. Probably PJ and Hopper.
I'm just going to give my tip for Saturday very quickly.
Of course, yeah, of course.
3:10 at Newbury, extended 3 mile 2 furlong handicap chase. I want the ground to continue to dry out for Highland Lodge, who was 4th in the Hennessy in 2013. You might remember it. Behind Valdalena for 100 mark of 143. Runs off 127 here. Okay? Now, I'm not saying he's as good as he was 2 years ago, but he looked fairly good in his 2 outings today. Goes well when fresh, hasn't run for the best part of 3.5 months. If he's declared on, and it is good ground at Newbury, I think he'll run a massive race, Highland Lodge, in the 3:10 at Newbury. Back to what you were saying before, it's been a pleasure to work with Dunkers, as you said at the beginning of the video. He's moving on to pastures new and bigger and better things, and hugely deserved as well. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to him, because he's been a model of consistency and integrity here at Easy Odds, and it's been a pleasure to work with.
Well, thank you, Paul. Yeah, we've had some pretty big winners on this video from the start to finish, regularly throwing them up in the double figures. We're very happy with that. Have a brilliant punting weekend, and keep checking Easy Odds for all of the latest previews and best prices.